Now, if you still have the minute or maybe 15 or 20 minutes here, Rick, I'd like to go over some of your rankings on some of these uranium stocks. Is that okay?
It is, although depending on what my current intention is with them, I might not want to encourage competition. So I might politely refuse to answer if it gets in the way of my own strategies.
No worries. Absolutely. Whatever you can give me away, every second and every opinion counts for me. So I'll also be selfish, and I'll just start with the companies that I might are owning or having on my watch list. I'll say which I don't, which I do, and which I don't own. I'll start with the smaller names on here, with the more speculative ones, I guess. I've recently become very fond of a small explorer higher up in the basin, in the Athabasca Basin, Baselode. What's your grade on that one?
Baselode is what I'm looking at. My suspicion is that Baselode is going to do a financing in the next 18 months. I don't own it. I would anticipate participating. Exploration is very much out of favor right now. And I expect that if they raise the money that they need to carry their exploration program forward over the next 2 years, that they might need to offer the terms and conditions that would attract me.
Okay. That's an interesting note to make. I guess roughly the same opinion that you could have for their neighbor, 92 Energy.
92 Energy, I haven't studied enough to have an opinion.
Yeah, same for me. I don't
own
own
nice
92.
drill holes. Couple of nice drill holes and some nice resumes. I don't know them well enough. I haven't done enough work on their exploration program to risk misleading your listeners.
I recently spoke to one of Baselode's even more recent neighbors, which was, a lot of people don't know that, but it's Corey Bellick from CanAlaska. They staked some ground up next to Baselode as well. And I know that you and your money really helped them make one of their discoveries around Cameco's properties deeper in the basin last year. That's one of my holdings. So what is your grade there?
CanAlaska gave me a 400% gain. And I'm gone from CanAlaska.
Okay.
CanAlaska seems to be much more willing now to do sole risk exploration. And I owned CanAlaska because I saw them as sort of the basin's premier prospect generator. Yeah. CanAlaska also has a very, very, very high exploration spend relative to their capital base. And I suspect that they too will have to return to market. I've known these people, this management team, for 2 decades. And my door will certainly be open to them, depending on the terms that they propose in any private placement that they might entertain.
Corey told me it shouldn't be soon that they're going into the market because they had still some money left. But it'd be interesting to watch. Too bad I can't participate in those yet. One of my other personal holdings has been a very frustrating and disappointing stock to hold, but I'm not frustrated with the company. Maybe a little bit. It's Standard Uranium. Did you have an opinion there?
Yeah, I think Standard Uranium is one that will do well in the market. I know the people. I know how they operate in bull markets. They're very clever people. What I don't see there is something that looks to me like it's going to be a $2.5 billion in situ reserve and resource. I have a huge prejudice against small mines. That's one of the reasons why I don't own the U.S. ISR producers or explorers much. I'm really not fond of small mines. In a bull market, speculators are much less discriminatory than I am, and everything goes up together. So for the reasons that I see their strategy involving, more of a hub and spoke and more sort of scabbing together a series of small deposits, I'm not a player there, but I think the stock will do well.
It might have been you that said it, something like small mines only make small money, something like those lines. Did you say that? I think I've heard
my mantra, I've learned it sadly, personally, is that both small mines and big mines have risks, big risks, but only big mines can make you big money. So the idea that I would take big risks for small money just doesn't make any sense to me.
I was going to ask about somebody who shares a name with you, with more experience, that being Rick Mazur from Forum Metals. I've picked up shares recently. So what's the opinion there?
I've known Rick for a very long time, and again, I'm no fan of sole risk exploration, which Rick exists to do. He has been involved in the Athabasca Basin since he was a youngster. He's done one thing, or effectively one thing, for a very long time. He's done things outside the basin, but he's very experienced up there, and I think he's a very good geo. That is not one I own. I'm not a fan of sole risk exploration until somebody gives me a drill hole. When somebody gives me a drill hole in context, when I can understand the third dimension, particularly when I can understand the third dimension and the stock stays cheap, something like ISO, then I'm hugely interested. In the current circumstance, I either need to get better confirmation or he needs to give me more generous terms.
I was going to ask you about some of the bigger explorers, maybe soon to be developers like NexGen, ISO, Fission. And I know that you like those, but they're rather high up in the market cap. That's what, 300, 500, and over $1 billion. I don't know. NexGen is an expensive stock. It's a highly priced stock. I don't know if it's an expensive one, though.
It has a very full market cap. It has the best undeveloped uranium asset in the world outside Kazakhstan. It will get built. And the nature of what they have and where it is means that they have de-emphasized exploration for the last 5 years. So in addition to the fact that it's the best undeveloped deposit in the world outside of Kazakhstan, it also has substantial exploration upside that I can see. I like all that. They have done, I think, a very good job of de-risking it within their means, which is to say that they've done a good job on engineering, a good job on processing, a good job on indigenous relationships, all the background stuff that doesn't get anybody excited except for a potential acquirer who sees a management team having reduced the timelines that they themselves would face if they acquire it. It's easy to have some criticisms about NexGen. They pay themselves and their independent directors obscenely. I was going to say extravagantly, but that's not sufficient. Obscenely. And the consequence of that is that a lot of wealth over the last 5 years that I believe that should rightly have gone to shareholders, and I've said this to the company, by the way, this isn't me talking behind their backs, has in fact gone to them. And I would love to see a moderation of the general and administrative expense, because that's dilution. But, I don't see in NexGen a 10-bagger, but I don't need a 10-bagger. If you take away most of my downside, you can have some of my upside. I'm fine with that trade. I see a deposit that will get built, and it will make a boatload of money. I mean, just a boatload of money. I also see a deposit that I think in the next 3 to 5 years will have a much bigger company's symbol around it.
I think Lee Courier would disagree with you about the management spend, because I've asked him about it. I interviewed him, and he wasn't too happy about the questions. It was the same questions that you would normally ask, because I stole your questions, obviously, but it's true.
I mean, listen, I like him. I respect him. You can imagine the extent of my concern as to whether or not he likes a question about his compensation.
Yeah, I can. Yeah. Rick, before we move on to a little bit lower in the map into the US that you've told me a little bit about, what's the highest ranking Canadian uranium company or a company with Canadian assets on your list right now?
Last week, I upgraded Cameco to 3.
Wow. Okay.
Not that I think it's the finest company in the world. That's Kazatomprom. But I think that generalist money will come into the uranium space sometime in the next 2 years. Generalist money is what I call tourists. And when tourists come into a resource name, particularly institutional tourists, they're concerned about career risk. They don't want to take political risk. They want to take as few risks as is possible. And the name that ticks those boxes is Cameco. Cameco has substantial underused capacity, which they thus far have been disciplined about not returning to production until the structure of the market improves. And what I think a lot of people don't understand about Cameco is that certainly at $60 yellow cake, if they have term structured market, that their free cash flow easily has the ability to triple or quadruple, which is an interesting story. They have been very steadily, very cleverly beavering away at exploration, which a lot of people don't know. They have much fewer permitting challenges than many of their younger competitors have because they're already permitted. They have tailings capacity, they have milling capacity, and importantly, they're a reasonable player in non-Russian enrichment and re-enrichment, which I think for the next 2 or 3 years is a business that can grow. I think people around the world are looking at supply chains, and I think that the world would look with favor at increasing non-Russian enrichment and re-enrichment capacity. And I think that Cameco has proven to Canadian society and the Canadian government that they deserve the ability to increase their productive capabilities with minimal permitting interference in that business.
I was a little surprised to hear that you still think Kazatomprom is the best uranium company out there, especially after the Q2 Cameco numbers, which were very good. The financials, I mean, this just showed us what kind of potential the company really has. So that's
I think that's true. If what you're looking for is leverage, you go to Cameco. If what you're looking for is de-risk participation, you go to Kazatomprom. Right. It's true that if your median cost of production is $30 a pound versus $15 a pound, a movement in the uranium price to 60 gives you a better earnings response as an inefficient producer than it does to an efficient producer.
Yep.
Both Cameco and Kazatomprom benefit from being fairly conservative in their resource and reserve calculations. Both of them have material available to them that isn't on the books, that if a junior held, would be the focus of their attention. Both Kazatomprom and Cameco have enviable grades and enviable intellectual capital around uranium.
Right.
But Kazatomprom has a scary development and exploration pipeline. They have the ability to return pounds to production, some of them, by the way, in joint venture with Cameco. At Inkai, that would be among the lowest cost pounds in the world. And importantly, these pounds are in situ leach pounds, which means that you return them to production by drilling what are in effect water wells and running a solution, basically bicarbonate of soda. I mean, it's like an oil and gas water flood. You can return this stuff to production in 9 or 10 months, as opposed to three or 4 years with a hot stopped underground conventional mine.
I was thinking of going lower on the map, as I said, into the US, but you just told me about the US that you're not really happy with, which I'm guessing are companies like Western Uranium and Vanadium, from whom we never hear anything, by the way, which is kind of frustrating. But is that like, do you have any high rankings in the US?
I don't. I think the stocks will perform well because I think American investors are ethnocentric. And I think that American investors believe that high-cost American production is better than low-cost Kazakh production. They're wrong, but there's more of them than there are me. And more people doing something propels a price higher than fewer people doing something. So in the near term, I think that the U.S. Uranium industry is very, very geared to narrative. And I think the stocks will trade well. I don't buy stock based on whether I think it's going to trade well. I buy stock because I think it represents fractional ownership in a business, and I want to be able to buy my fraction cheaply. So the consequence of that is that I don't trouble myself in the U.S. uranium space, with the exception, of course, of owning UEC and having no cost basis in it, having sold enough that I have the rest for free, and uranium royalty.
What about the African then? Because I know that you do like Africa as a cheap side, as a lower quartile production spot.
Yep. So, I like the waterfront. I like Paladin. I like Lotus. I like Deep Yellow. Okay. I'm warming up to General Atomic as that deposit grows in size. my criticism of it before was I liked the grade. I did not like the country it was in, nor the part of the country that it's in. I was nervous about going there myself. And if you're concerned for your own safety, you shouldn't send somebody to look at a deposit. Those concerns appear, at least in the near term, to have ameliorated. So I'm looking at Global Atomic with much fresher eyes than I would have looked at it before.
I own Global Atomic, and I was sold on to it mainly by Stephen Roman, the CEO, whose dad started Denison, if I have that correctly.
His dad was a good friend of mine and a spectacular guy, and it was, in fact, Denison.
Right.
And it's worthwhile to note that the Roman family still has access to a lot of the Denison database. So when Steve Roman went to look for uranium deposits on a global basis, he didn't have to do too much generative geology. All he had to do was look at his basement, which is a durable competitive advantage. The same advantage that caused me to fund Borshoff in 1998.
Right.
These databases are very, very valuable, as is 3 decades of experience, organic experience in uranium. There's a lot of folks in the uranium business now that learned how to spell it 5 years ago. Roman grew up with discussions about uranium around the breakfast table. And that's something that's very difficult to replicate.
Yeah, he definitely grew up with only yellow cakes for his birthday. I'm sorry, this is a bad joke. What about the public's favorite? Didn't hear you mention it. Bannerman. I talked to their CEO a lot. Brandon Monroe is a very bright guy. He's all over the place in the nuclear energy, and I really like him.
I have huge time for him. I'm not yet a shareholder. I have been. I traded out of it. My objection 3 years ago was scope and scale. I didn't see $2.5 billion in net present value in situ reserves and resources at then published resource numbers at then published prices. I'm warming up to Bannerman largely because I'm a huge fan of the CEO. I want to be sold on the name.
Right. It's impossible to like him. I think he's kind of like John Borshoff, but on a couple of years younger. So that's the same for me. I'm talking to GoviEx soon. Haven't spoken to them in a while. I was not super sold on their asset the first time. Are you a shareholder?
I'm not a shareholder of GoviEx. I have been a shareholder of GoviEx. I've got a lot of time for Dan Major. I have a love-hate relationship with Niger. From a geological point of view, it's an extraordinarily good place. From a social and political point of view, it's very challenged. It's also within the French sphere of influence, which means that there may need to be accommodation of French interests to advance a project. Of course, Global Atomic would face the same challenge. The range of assets they have is frankly pretty appealing. They have from time to time played chicken with capital markets, which is to say they haven't always raised as much as they could when they could. They have, as a consequence, I think, of being a Friedland family stock, had access to capital that was, I thought, too generous at the time, which is to say the price that I would have paid for participation was more than I was willing to pay. I think we're coming into the period of the market now where if they begin to develop traction, Govind, the son of Robert Friedland, for those of your listeners who don't know, will be able to lean on his dad more and more. And I think his dad's interest increasingly is in a decarbonized world. And I think the work that his dad has done in battery metals and in Ivanhoe Electric, in copper, in all things electric, will give Robert both the incentive to be more aggressive in helping his son, but also give his son access to Robert's Rolodex of investors, which is perhaps the best Rolodex that exists in the junior sphere.
Definitely. That's definitely true. What's the highest ranking in Africa right now?
I'm sorry?
What's the highest ranking in Africa right now on your list?
4.
Okay. Okay. For who
You'll
gets
note
it?
that I think we've discussed this before, relative to most commentators, perhaps because of my age, I'm a very strict grader.
Mm-hmm. Well, 4 is not too bad considering that you give Cameco a 3, so 4 is pretty close to that. Who gets
Right.
it?
Pardon?
Who gets
No
it?
comment.
Okay, fair enough.
No,
You
you
told me
can
about that
probably
at the
figure it
beginning.
out from my
Yeah,
earlier. You could probably figure it out from my earlier uh, discussions of who I was attracted to.
sure. Yeah, fair game. I know you almost got to run, so we cannot go through every company in Australia. Is there a higher ranking in Australia than there is in Africa?
No,
Okay, fair enough.
no. There's I mean, Boss is sort of knocking on the door.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah. Duncan again. Impossible to dislike him. Okay, so Rick, I understand that you have to run now. I've definitely missed to mention a bunch of companies, and people will bite my head off for it in the comments. But if anybody wants those rankings on those companies, they want you to look into their portfolio. How can they to make you do that, and what do they
Sure.
have to pay for it?
Any listener who cares what I think about their natural resource portfolio can find out for free with no obligation by going to ruleinvestmentmedia.com. List your natural resource stocks. Please no crypto. Please no tech stocks. Please no narcotic stocks or whatever you call those things, just natural resource stocks. I'll rank them 1 to 10, 1 being best, 10 being worst. I'll comment on individual issues where I think my comments might have some value. Note, too, that the rankings change on a wholesale basis about every 6 weeks. So the rankings get stale very quickly. Note that I will upgrade or downgrade companies much more quickly to the extent that the news justifies it. All I'm trying to say is that your rankings are a snapshot in time. They're not investment advice.